Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect dialogue of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, accessibility, all the things with leadership in business. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. Shout out to the NWC team. We all work tirelessly week after week after week over the past 4.5 years to bring this virtual learning experience to the broader community. And we're so excited to have you here today with us. Please go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from. It is always super exciting to us to see the many geographies that are represented among this community of learners. It's not just individuals that's within the United States, but we even have folks to join outside of the US. And that makes us incredibly happy. When you join and participate as part of our community, you're letting us know that you find this content to be valuable. And we couldn't be more excited to have you here with us. I also want to give a great shout out to all of those who are joining us on LinkedIn Live. Many of you know not only do we have a Zoom community that will join us, but also there are many folks who catch the podcast just by going to LinkedIn where we stream it live there. And so for those of you who are joining LinkedIn Live, be sure you're using the comment section that helps us to get proximate to you and bring some of your sentiments and expressions into our Zoom community so that we all can be connected during this hour of time. If you're here on Zoom and you desire to be connected to this community beyond this hour of time, then share your LinkedIn information. That lets us know that we can connect with you. And I'm also going to invite my team at this time to share into the chat my LinkedIn information. I certainly would love to be in community with each of you in that space as well. Now, at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. So with that said, we always enable closed captions. So I want you to be aware that that is available to you if that is of benefit. Once again, you've joined Intentional Conversations VodCast, and I hope you all enjoy today's show. Let the conversations begin, and that is exactly what we're about to do at this time. If you're just tuning in, you have tuned in to Intentional Conversations VodCast. We also have the show available in podcast capacity, but welcome. We're so incredibly honored that you are spending this hour of time with us. One of the things that we love to do at the top of the hour of our show is just to remind our community of some of the national observances that we want you to be aware of. September 15th through October 15th is National Hispanic Heritage Month. And so we always want to make sure that we are amplifying ways that we can stand in solidarity with communities that often find themselves victims of systems of oppression, but they are offering a great level of contributions to our community at large. And we want to make sure that we're standing in support with them. So National Hispanic Heritage Month, make sure that's on your radar. It's also important for us to talk about the fact that September is Prostate Cancer Awareness Month. Many of you have heard me talk about in the past how this is so very near and close to me and my family. And so I often like to make sure I'm socializing around the need for us to make sure the men in our lives, particularly the Black men in our lives, are getting screened and tested. But Black men are 1.7 times more likely to be diagnosed with and 2.1 times more likely to die from prostate cancer than white men. And Black men are also slightly more likely than white men to be diagnosed with advanced disease. And so, yes, make sure we're having this conversation, make sure we're encouraging those screenings so that we can protect all of those in our community that we love and honor and want to see here for a long time. It is also National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And so that is really important. We know that once we start entering the end of the year with all of those end of year deadlines, there are many people whose anxiety and stress level may increase and heighten. And so it's just so important for us to check on all of our friends, even those strong friends that we think are incredibly at a place of great mental strength. And so let's just keep in mind Suicide Prevention Awareness Month is September. I also want you to know lots of things are going on in September, but it's National Recovery Month. And if you aren't familiar with National Recovery Month, this is a national observance, and it is all about the nation really just centering our attention on recovery community and the dedicated service providers that are part of that community that make recovery in all its forms possible. So National Recovery Month is part of September as well. Now, if you're part of our community, you know that I often share about our LinkedIn learning opportunities. We have 4 that are out there, including my latest, which is addressing hate speech in the workplace. It is now available. I've teased you with this one for quite some time, but it is available. And I cannot tell you that there's no better time, especially when we think about the civil discourse that's happening as we enter into this high stakes election season. But I want you to make sure that you are prepared, that your colleagues are prepared with tools in the toolbox to be able to have civil discourse, to be able to hold space for people with different opinions, but to do so in a way that's very respectful and certainly does not enter into the category of hate speech, which is different from free speech. So take advantage of that LinkedIn Learning course now available to you. If you like intentional conversations and you also like to be able to get it on the go because maybe you can't be here live on Fridays during this hour, just know that we do extract the audio from our vodcast and we make intentional conversations available in podcast capacity for all of those who like to get their content on the go. So you'll see all the available platforms where you can get intentional conversations in podcast capacity. Now, it's that time where I often give you a little bit of what you have to look forward to in the upcoming weeks by way of our guest co-host that will be joining us. And I am super excited because September 20th, we have the pleasure of welcoming Helena Powell. And in that Intentional Conversation podcast, we're going to discuss how we can do better to improve for the deaf community. And also discovering ourselves as Black women who have a disability and mental health as Black women, really important topics. So I look forward to you joining us for September 20th with Helena Powell. And then following September 20th, the end of the month, we will be closing out with Jaleesa Dallas. And in that podcast conversation, we're going to discuss what courageous leadership means, how embracing vulnerability contributes to true strength and authenticity in leadership, and how what she refers to as the Go Brave framework helps leaders to cultivate a growth mindset, maximize resilience, and inspire others. So I look forward to Jaleesa sharing with us at the end of this month. Be sure to join us as well. Now, it does me great pleasure to take the opportunity to formally introduce today's guest co-host. And if you've been with us for quite some time, you know that I do so by reading their formal bio. I do that because it's critically important for me, for our community, to understand the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so today will be no different. Shani Dellimore Barrax is a strategic diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner with more than 25 years of practical experience in organizational culture change and change leadership, training and development, strategic planning and execution, and coalition and capacity building. She serves as the principal of Aurora Change Agency, a consulting firm partnering with organizations to create intentionally inclusive and humane cultures of belonging, characterized by psychological safety, self-inquiry, and the freedom to innovate. Recently, she became a co-founder and chief learning officer of the Iconi Collective, a work well-being movement for Black women that facilitates individual and collective professional development, healing, and community. Trained mediator, Cornell University, certified diversity practitioner, advanced practitioner, intercultural development inventory qualified administrator, and Prosky certified change management practitioner. Shani has led and liaised with cross-functional teams across sectors such as education, nonprofit, and professional associations, corporate entities, and the arts to increase individual and organizational capacities through change agency facilitation. Her skills include integration of cultural humility and self-reflection into learning and development strategy through innovative curriculum design and delivery, data storytelling for strategic road mapping, application of academic theory to practice, inclusive leadership development, and personal advising. a former Carrollton City Council candidate in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Shani is a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated and mom to two teenage daughters. So you know what to do at this time, podcast community. I want you to find those accolades, find words of affirmation, find those reactions, those emojis, and help me to welcome our guest co-host today by placing those into the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and add Shani on to the spotlight. And we're just going to be in conversation, sharing all the things that are critically important for us to really just highlight today. And I am so grateful because I always tell our guest co-hosts that they could be anywhere doing anything, but when they say yes to our invitation, we're always so gracious. And so one of the things that we do here, Shani, as we are going to release you in just a second to greet our audience in your own way, is tradition for us to ask our guest co-hosts to share something about themselves that we would not know from reading or hearing their bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you. And feel free to greet this audience.
Hello, Nika. Hello, everyone. Once again, I am Shani Dellimore Barrax, she, her, hers. That name is relatively new. I just recently last year changed my name from my married name to a whole new name that is totally made up. Dellimore is my mother's maiden name. My mother was an immigrant from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is a teeny tiny little island in the Caribbean that recently just got hit by Hurricane Beryl. So on my LinkedIn, when I say Vincy Strong, that's where it comes from.
Very
We have active volcanoes and everything. And my dad, so my mother, Dr. Joan Barrax, was, they were both higher education pioneers. My mother gave her life to historically Black colleges and universities, most notably Shaw University. So even though I am a Tar Heel, proud alumna of UNC Chapel Hill, I spent a lot of time on the campus of Shaw University and also North Carolina State University, where my father, Gerald Barrax, was the first Black professor and is also a very well-known poet. He's been in a lot of different anthologies and such. So I reclaimed my name as a way of, if you think about Sankofa, sort of looking back and moving forward. And I will be 50 years old on New Year's Eve. So I am going through a bit of a transition, a life transition. I'm about to be an empty nester. My daughter is a sophomore at UT Austin. I'm very proud of both of my daughters. She has a full academic scholarship in the honors business program at UT Austin. And my younger daughter, who just turned 18 yesterday, wants to be a therapist to reach Black women. Because she knows how critical that is. But as for me, I'm fundamentally a change agent. I've been rabble rousing and organizing walkouts for multicultural curricula since high school. So what I'm really about is helping people. I try to model leveraging my own privilege and social capital and encouraging others to do the same. So that's basically who I am. So thanks for having me here, Nika.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. I love how proudly you speak of your parents and your children. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And the story of reclaiming your name is fascinating to me. So thank you so much for sharing that as one of the fun facts that maybe we would not know by reading your bio or looking at your profile. Okay, so Shani, I want to jump right in because we have lots of things I want to make sure that we can cover. And so let's first just start with level setting a little bit about your background. How has your 25 years of experience shaped your approach to creating inclusive organizational cultures of belonging?
Yeah, well, I started out as a journalist. I was a journalism major. And
So was I. So interesting.
yeah. When Carolina at the time was the #1 journalism school in the country. So shout out to Carolina's J School. And I often say that I sort of tripped and fell into diversity, equity, and inclusion work when I was still in public relations and I was the director of communications at the YWCA. The YWCA has always been at the forefront of racial justice. They're mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. So even back then, I was the co-chair of the Racial Justice Committee.
Yeah.
And that was, in the 90s. So when I say I've been doing this work since the late 90s, that's kind of where it came from. And that foundation as a storyteller, as a purveyor of facts and truth,
Mhm.
has really helped me, I think, in this work as a DEIB practitioner. And I really feel like the turning point for me, even after I was the Racial Justice Program Director for the YWCA, which was a community-based, dialogue-based
Yeah.
effort. And I think that's why I integrate dialogue into everything I do, because I think a lot of times we talk at each other, or we're
That's
just listening
you.
to a talking head and we're not engaging with other humans. But cultural humility is the foundation of everything that I do, which is totally different than cultural competence. And I like to use the metaphor of a mirror. My parents were English professors, so I use a lot of metaphors, where cultural humility, cultural competence, if you think about a mirror, is turning the mirror outward. And it's really
Mhm.
more learning about other people, other cultural norms. And it's more academic, whereas cultural humility is turning the mirror inward. And it's really thinking more about your own identities,
Mhm.
your own perspectives, experiences, interactions, and how they juxtapose to others. So the notion of cultural humility really came out of the medical community, and it was introduced at the end of the 20th century by
Mhm.
Melody Turbalon and Jan Mary Garcia. So I really try to facilitate that kind of self-awareness and reflection in everything that I do. And I also am very big about trying to get people to understand that everything is relative. I work a lot with scientists, and so, saying that there's a lot of gray in this space is
Right.
difficult for some people because there are no right or wrong answers, right? So I try to create opportunities for people to understand those relative perspectives and to engage in perspective sharing, where you can understand where and how what affects one person may affect another person differently. And I try to get my clients and people that I work with to recognize the time that it takes to do this well.
Yeah.
You cannot
Yeah.
really move the needle on this by just watching something, which is great. That's the intrapersonal, but then you have to engage with other humans, right? To
Absolutely.
really apply these concepts to real life. So that's really my approach to capacity building around DEIB.
No, I love that. Thanks so much for giving us a deeper insight into how you like to show up to this work and your approach. I love the mirror analogy. That internal work I often too speak of as being critically important. It's going to be hard for us to try to change others' thinking and what and how in which they may see the world. And sometimes we can't change that, right? But it starts with us being keenly aware of who we are, how we show up, why we behave the way that we do, why we interact the way that we do. So I love the mirror analogy. When you talked about dialogue facilitation, that also resonated with me, Shani. And I think the reason why is, to just kind of go further into what you shared, it is such a skill set that I think creates a greater ability for people's willingness to show forth around again, just perspective taking, perspective sharing, and being open and being curious. And not everyone can do that and do that well. But when
That's
you
right.
bring that skill set into this body of work that you and I both are connected to, it really can make a significant difference. And so I
Yeah.
love that. The
Yeah.
last thing I'll comment on is, the gray space, right? You're so right. And I often refer to that as holding the middle, right? Because sometimes there can be a both and. Sometimes there can be two truths, but it's the truth for one person maybe versus the truth for another person. So how are we at least just opening up people's curiosities to be able to stay in the conversation long enough to satisfy some of those curiosities and to gain some additional learning that perhaps they did not show up to the conversation with. And so
Yeah,
a lot
this
of what
work
you're
is,
sharing.
to your point,
Yeah.
Nika, this work is both a science and an art, right?
Yeah,
That it's both
absolutely.
head work and heart work. And I think,
Yes.
there's some people that jumped into it recently and that maybe didn't have the same professional background, and it affected the way people are receiving the work if they're not
Yes.
adept in creating those
Yes.
safe and brave spaces for people to actually engage with other humans, right? Because that's
Absolutely.
what it's really about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and practitioners in this space are not all created equal. And it relates a lot to the point that you just made. I think that we've seen a lot of significant circumstances that became very public that caused a lot of individuals that cared about this work, saw it as an opportunity to be able to, hang their hats in a space that was kind of shiny and interesting to them at the time, but that have not necessarily put in the full training and learning to be able to do this effectively. And that is not an indictment on anyone in particular or a judgment, but it is to bring greater amplification to the skills and the training that goes into effectiveness with this body of work and this discipline that I can't understate. And so thank you too for also sharing that point. So you have something, Shani, that you refer to as psychological Spanx, and I want us to unpack that for our audience right now. So if you could please explain that concept and how a lack of psychological safety affects people, particularly Black women in the workplace.
Yeah, I love talking about psychological Spanx with Black women, with women in general. And because all of us can think about, as women, the standards of beauty that we are expected to adhere to, right?
100%.
There are white standards of beauty, if we're talking about centering the experiences of Black women right now, right?
Yeah.
And those white standards of beauty dictate to us, what our body should look like, what our hair should look like, what our skin should look like, all of those things, right?
Yes.
And, one of the things that we do as women is alter our bodies to ascribe to that standard of beauty. And some women wear things like Spanx or other waist trainers, to give us that hourglass
That
figure
snatch
that
look.
certainly, as I have been going through menopause, has become more and more elusive. But anywho, the point is, oftentimes those things that we do to our body, like waist trainers and cinchers, are not comfortable, right? But
Yeah.
we do it because we are trying to ascribe to a standard, an external standard, a standard that's not been set by us, but we've been socialized to know and understand and believe, if this, then that, right?
Yes.
So this notion of psychological Spanx is, when you think about the feeling of waist trainers, it's that feeling of being sort of bound up, holding yourself in, making it hard to breathe. I know when I used to wear them, because I don't anymore, first thing I would do when I came in the door
Take it
was
off.
so that I
Yeah.
could breathe, I could be authentic, right?
Hmm.
I don't have to perform. And having to constantly wear that psychological Spanx of ascribing and performing, it makes me think of that poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, We Wear the
Yeah.
Mask, that starts,
Yes, we
we
wear the
wear the
mask.
mask that grins and lies, right? It
Hmm.
leads to things like racial battle fatigue. I had the absolute honor and privilege of meeting Dr. William A. Smith, who came up with the notion of racial battle fatigue, although it's not in any DSM, because then there would have to be an acknowledgement that structural
Yeah.
racism exists. But it's unique to Black women specifically, in that Kimberly Crenshaw, who came up with the term intersectionality,
Hmm.
and she has said this over and over and over and over. Intersectionality is specifically about the unique experiences of Black women,
Black
the
women.
intersection of the identities of being both Black in America and a woman. That is intersectionality. Everything else is intersected identities. And I always say this to people: stop saying intersectionality unless you're talking about Black women. Kimberly Crenshaw has said over and over, intersectionality
Yeah.
about our lived experience. Anyway, shouts out to Kimberly Crenshaw and for centering the experiences of Black women. But one of the things that we're trying to do with the Akani Collective, and I have to say, I want to give all due props to Dr. Jade Singleton, who is the founder and visionary of the Akani Collective. Akani means icon in Swahili. My name actually happens to mean marvelous unexpected event in Swahili. But Jade is the founder. Esther Nicholson, who's one of the co-founders, she's the chief wellness officer. She has her own practice called Soul Recovery, where she does a lot with addiction recovery. You know, you talked about this being a National Recovery Month. And when you
Mhm.
think about mental wellness, a lot of times as Black women, we may fall into those spaces of addiction,
Yeah.
right? You know, because
Right.
we've been
Absolutely.
gaslighted at work. We've been told,
Yeah.
we've been tone policed. We've been
Yeah.
told we're talking about race too much, right? You know,
They
and
become
so
coping mechanisms for a lot of Black women.
that's
Yes.
right. That's right. That's right. So what we're trying to do is and this is part of addressing the psychological Spanx, is to provide a safe space for Black women, centering the experiences of Black women, to share those experiences, explore things that are related to us, such as linked fate. Jade did an amazing session through her consulting practice. We're all in the DEIB space, but in different ways, where she talked about linked fate. And when you know, think about Kamala Harris being, you know, the first Black and South Asian vice president, and who, you know, I'm going to claim is going to be the first Black and South Asian president of the United States. I said it.
I'm with you,
Um,
sister.
said it. But, you know, and those of us who look like her have also been enduring the effect of the microaggressions and things like, you know, saying she's a DEI hire and minimizing her absolute expertise. So psychological safety, and, you know, what we're doing with the Akani Collective is saying it is okay to talk about race.
Right.
Race and identity does matter. This is a place where you will be affirmed. You won't be told, well, maybe it wasn't about race. Well, that usually comes from people who have what I like to call the privilege of oblivion, for whom race may not be a factor in their day-to-day,
Absolutely.
right? You know, so that's what psychological Spanx is. It's helping people to understand that this is our lived experience. You know, we can't cry in public in the same ways that white women can. You know, white women can weaponize their tears. Nobody cares about our tears. So many of us just choose not to emote in public because we're not going to get the same, reaction anyway. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but it's really psychological Spanx. The notion of psychological Spanx was really designed when I came up with it, and I hope that Sarah Blakey doesn't come after me because I have not asked her permission to use Spanx, but I am trademarking the term. You know that we are often bound up, and so often the way we show up in a space may
Mm,
be a result of wearing those psychological Spanx where we can't,
100%.
right?
Yeah, 100%. Shani, this is so good. I want to stay here just for a moment before I go to the next question. So first and foremost, yes, thank you for amplifying the fact that the work of Kimberly Crenshaw was very specifically in context to Black women. I do also, along with you, realize that the concept of intersectionality has expanded for a lot of people, just to be able to use that to talk about intersecting identities of all types. And so I just wanted to echo that clarification. So thank you for that. Now, I absolutely love psychological Spanx. And again, that's another analogy that I think beautifully helps people to really get proximate to exactly what we're talking about, right? For those of us who live the experience every single day, it doesn't take too much, but for others who are in, categories of great privilege, and they may not have to experience that discomfort that's described as wearing the Spanx. Yes, I know all too well about it. That it really is incredibly harmful. And so when people say things like, "Why do we have to always talk about race?" I'm with you on that, because we can't really separate that, not with the way in which society has always shown up to the conversation, right? And I'm even mindful of just earlier this week, many of us were watching the presidential debate. And, you know, race was a question that certainly came up, and rightfully so. And as you were talking about psychological Spanx, I couldn't help but to think about the community of individuals in which I was watching the debate with, and how all of us, before it started and even while it was going on, many of us were kind of holding our breaths a little bit because we were thinking to ourselves, we hope that she just can remain poised and controlled and presidential, because sometimes we know that as Black women, as women of color,
You're
we
needling
can't
us.
be authentic, right?
Yeah.
And so yes, and we all know and could anticipate that there were going to be moments of, you know, extreme frustration, right? To where
Absolutely.
some of our realness may want to just, you know, surface, and we should be able to safely allow that to happen. But we know that the stakes, with this election is so high that there was a need to be very controlled, throughout. And I do think that Madam, Vice President did incredibly well at that. But I was, you know, again, just taking it back to something that is top of mind for all of us right now, which is, you know, of course, this high stakes election and the fact that we just, witnessed the debate. I wanted to kind of also bring that to the conversation because this is exactly what was coming up for me as I heard you describe what you
Yeah, Nika,
referred to as
sorry, I didn't mean to
psychological
cut you off,
space.
but I want to make a point to something that you just said that it made me think about, one of the things that I actually, prayed for. I try to meditate every day, and is to for God to place people, places, things, experiences in my path that are different from me to help build my capacity to understand and seek to understand. And so
Yeah.
I have developed a beautiful family relationship with some neighbors in my neighborhood, a gay white male couple. And one of them is an older gentleman. And he said, as we were talking about the election, why can't we just get past race? And I said, well, we have to go through it. You can't resolve something by continuing to walk past. Ooh, that's bad. You know,
Exactly.
you have to stop, engage,
Yes.
find out what's happening, kind of what she said in the debate, when she's representing the people, the first thing she asks is, how can I help you? And I have this awareness continuum where I talk about the only way that we move beyond tolerance is through understanding. And that
Yeah.
is active and intentional, which
Yes.
obviously you value intentionality, um,
Yes.
act to want to engage with others and seek to understand.
Yes.
Otherwise, we stay in, these spaces of willful oblivion,
Yes.
that
Yes.
keep us
Yes.
separated.
Willful ignorance is real.
Yep.
And to your point, willingness to engage begins first with an acknowledgement that the issues, the problem exist. And I think that that too is where, we find a huge stumbling block is there are
Yes.
folks who are unwilling to just acknowledge that,
Right.
it's an issue. It's an issue how in which our society views race and how in which we are, continuing to allow systems of oppression to show forth, because of race. And so it has to continue to be a part of the conversation. So I like what you said. We have to go through it.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the importance of identity-based programs. This is very much in your wheelhouse. And when I think about like employee resource groups, business resource groups, affinity groups, they're labeled, the nomenclature can vary, but and how eliminating them certainly could set back progress in diversity and inclusion. I want you to talk from your experience. What are you seeing as many organizations have been pulling back, and even maybe just completely eliminating their DEI initiatives and programming, and specifically as it relates to these employee resource groups or affinity groups that are designed to help create a sense of community and upward mobility for those underrepresented, I often say underestimated populations in our society and workplace.
Yeah, this question is very, I have to manage my feels about it because I live in Texas. And I was formerly the assistant vice president and director of diversity and inclusion of a division at the University of North Texas. at which I did a Coursera, a very well-attended Coursera called Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Essentials that was taken down. Everything that we did and built was taken down. And just this week, I got a text because I'm still in communication with many of the people that I worked with there, because you
Sure.
become family because you're in the trenches together, that they just this week yanked all the employee resource groups.
Oh,
And these are groups that have existed that predated me, that and it's interesting because I mentioned that my daughter, who is at UT Austin, and she's in the honors business program, which you can, it's as not as diverse as you think it is. And of course, we've gotten rid of affirmative action, which all the numbers are showing are disparately affecting Black students and Black
absolutely.
and institutions of higher education. And, all of the advisement that I would typically give a student, I can't give to my daughter because many of those supports are being taken away. Right. And so what I would say is that one of the things that I also think is inextricably linked with this work is an awareness about racial identity development. Okay. On my website, aurorachangeagency.com, I've got a playlist, and one of the things on the playlist is a summary of the Hardeman-Jackson racial identity development model that summarizes all of the racial identity development models: Helms White, Cross, Black, et cetera, et cetera. And the desire to want to be with people who are like you, akin to the famous book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, is a natural part of racial identity development and any other kind of identity development.
Right.
Because inevitably, as a member of a minoritized group, and this is what people with the privilege of oblivion don't understand often, is that you might think, oh, we're inclusive, we don't need these groups because everybody feels welcome here. How do you know? Have you asked them?
Exactly.
Have you done a climate survey? So if you don't have data, empirical evidence to suggest that everyone's having the same experience. And what I will tell you, Nika, I've been doing this work, almost 30 years. And every time we do any kind of climate survey, I don't care what it is, always, 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 it is the Black folks in any given organization that are having the most minoritized experience, right?
Of course, same. I experienced the exact same. You have to disaggregate that data and look at it by those different populations to be able to see this new story surface, but that story is equally important. So I'm totally there with you.
And being willing to listen. You had said something earlier about really listening to people's experiences. When I ran for city council in 2021 and I was recruited to run, and I really ran on the idea that not everyone experiences the city the same. And I remember, I will never forget this as long as I live, being at the candidate forum and talking about the lived experiences of my daughters and me, where we live right next door to you. And a former mayor, as I was talking, just shaking their head, and I said, and I remember looking at them and going, and believing them.
Yes.
Because if I'm telling you that this is my lived experience, simply because you're not familiar with it and haven't experienced does not negate the fact that it exists. And I think that privilege of oblivion and I think sort of the DEI fatigue and fragility has come from no one wants to be uncomfortable. And I often will say what employee resource groups and the associated, broader programs that happen, that are part of DEI programs, is they're trying to facilitate that bonding and bridging capital among people that share an identity, right?
Mm,
And then bridging capital with members of other groups of different identities, but you get that collective support, right? When you're working with people who are like you. And when you get rid of those efforts, there is an amazing talk that Melody Hobson did in 2014 called Color Blind or Color Brave.
color
You're
brave.
probably familiar with it, right?
Absolutely.
And what she does is really explains, and I often would use this in talking about cultural humility, is that color blindness, when you say that you don't see me as a Black woman, first of all, that's not true, because yes, you do. And
Right.
me being a Black woman, and I can't separate the two. Yes, I'm both Black and a woman. If I mean, it's the Blackness for me that is my primary identity, but they're inextricably linked, as we talked about with Kimberly Crenshaw. To say that we are going back to color blindness, i.e., getting rid of employee resource groups and the like, is taking us back to a place where you are marginalizing me and negating my experience and rendering me invisible and unimportant and not a priority by saying, I don't see your difference.
Yeah.
It's
It's
because my
erasure.
difference makes you feel uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
because you're not willing to be uncomfortable for the 15 minutes of this conversation, we talked about dialogue, that would explain why the organization in which they don't want to give the time to talking about this is probably a monocultural organization, as opposed to being a multicultural organization that values, it takes time, space, place, money, all of those things to do this work well. It's not something that's performative that you can just check a box. Could you tell I have feels about this? Let me find my mute button, honey.
100%. I am right there with you. I'll just say it takes will, both, and skills, not just about our passion. Passion will only take you but so far. So
That's right, right. That's right.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I often
mentioned,
say my tagline is adding proficiency to your passion, because there again,
yeah.
well-meaning people stepped into the ring to do this
Yes.
work without
Yes.
the proper training. And of course, they pissed off some people if they don't know how to facilitate these conversations adeptly. Of
Yeah.
course, there are people saying you're shoving this down my throat. Like I said, this is both an art and a science.
Hmm.
And just
Totally
like
agree.
anything else, like you're not gonna bring somebody off the street who loves money and say, oh, you like money, you want to be an accountant? What good sense does that
Absolutely.
make? So why are we doing this with DEI anyway? Yeah,
Absolutely.
so it's
Absolutely. No, I'm right there with you. So we're quickly closing in on our time, but I do want to go back to something that you referenced a moment ago, and of course it was also in your bio. But your run for Carrollton City Council. I know that your work in the community has really influenced your perspective on building inclusive environments across different sectors. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the intersection of those experiences to how in which you like to approach and show up to the work that you do.
yeah, I thought of, as I was thinking about this question, outside of watching my parents sort of be pioneers in their respective areas, but in both cases in higher education, I have to say that, I became a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated when I was 18 at UNC, because, again, going back to identity-based groups, it created
Right.
a sense of community for me. And there was
Yeah.
benefit in that we were the smallest of the D9. It was the grade 8 at the time. And our motto was greater service, greater progress. So from
Mhm.
the time I became an adult, it has been indoctrinated, if you will, in me that service and progress are inextricably linked. My
Yes.
favorite quote is by Frederick Douglass: "Without struggle, there is no progress. Power
Mhm.
conceives nothing without demand." And so I feel like, it's to whom much is given, much is required.
Record.
And if you have relative privilege, I feel like it is incumbent upon you, particularly if you're a member of a minoritized group, it is incumbent upon you to look back behind you. And if you are not a member of a minoritized group, it is incumbent upon you to acknowledge your privilege at
Right.
minimum.
Yes.
Then you can become an ally or accomplice. And obviously, well, not obviously, but we're doing some work with accomplishship through the Akani Collective. But if you choose to do nothing, then you and the status quo must be real cool. You
Real
can't,
cool. Yeah.
you can't, it's the same thing about voting. Why complain if you're not gonna be part of the solution? So I
Mhm.
feel like everybody has God-given gifts and talents, and it's a matter of getting in where you fit in, but you have to be willing to use those gifts to do something, anything, but
Yeah. To
anything
do
that,
something. Yeah.
yeah,
Something honorably to help somebody else along the way.
yes,
Absolutely. Especially
yes,
those minoritized groups, as you mentioned. Okay, so I want to give you an opportunity to close us out in whatever way that feels good for you. I know we've talked about a lot, but I'm sure there's a lot more we could have also addressed. And so if there's something that you're feeling a lot of energy around that you want to socialize with this community, I want to give you a chance to do so. But before I release you to do that, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation. I want to thank you for the work that you do. I want to thank you for your leadership, your service to community. And then, of course, just thank you for being here with us today to share your insight. We really do not take that for granted. And we hope to be able to continue following your work and maybe even invite you back again for another episode.
I would love
But
to.
thank you to our community as well for joining us. But Shani, yes, close us out. What do you want us to know that we have not been able to touch on today? Give us some parting remarks.
Well, yeah. Well, I shared with you my favorite quote: "Without struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without demand." I mentioned the Akani Collective, and one of the things that we're working on now is I've always wanted to do an Accomplishship Institute.
Mhm.
So we are working right now on the curriculum for an Accomplishship Institute designed specifically for white women
Okay.
to move beyond allyship to accomplishship. It's going to be a long-term effort, so it's not going to be one and done. So you can hear more about that by following the Akani Collective on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. I mentioned that the Coursera that I had that got taken down, I'm going to repackage it into
Good
an
for you.
opportunity, yeah, for people to really just have customized learning and development opportunities that really are cultivating change agency. So I'll be announcing that on my LinkedIn when that's ready. I'm doing some work internationally. I did some work with Queen's University in Canada before, and I'm going to be doing some work with some school systems in Canada. And also, one of the things that I'll say is that because I'm about to be an empty nester, and I'm in a space of transition, I am actually exploring opportunities, employment opportunities, and working with someone else, with another organization that supports the work that I do, my
Mhm.
consulting work and my Akani Collective work. I want it to be remote. So if there is anyone out there who is looking for an inclusive and innovative strategist to really help move the needle on organizational culture and development, holla at your girl. Could be a match.
There you go. There you go. We'll be sure to share your LinkedIn information into the chat. I hope that our community will certainly find it fit to reach out, to follow your content, to stay in touch. And again, we're just grateful to have you here today. Thank you all for joining Intentional Conversations podcast. We hope to see you next week on another episode. Have a safe, wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye bye.